Right, hello again. This is the fourth lecture in a series of 6 on philosophy and coaching, and in particular, what insights or techniques from philosophy, and indeed conclusions from philosophy, might be useful for coaches of all sorts: business coaches, life coaches, recovery coaches, relationship coaches, cricket coaches, and so on. Today, the subject is philosophical psychology, or philosophy of mind, or just philosophy and psychology. Now, unlike ethics and religion, the relevance of psychology to coaching is pretty obvious, or it might seem so to many, in a way that questions about morality and religion, which we've been dealing with, might not seem to be of obvious relevance. After all, psychology studies the mind in the same way that physiology studies the body. So, since much coaching is focused on enhancing the health and well-being of the mind, a knowledge of psychology is important for coaching in the same way that a knowledge of physiology is important for those concerned with enhancing the health and well-being of the body. So, what's philosophy got to do with it? Well, one important thing that philosophy has to offer, not just coaches, but actually anyone engaged in any activity, has to do with the method of philosophy, which focuses a great deal on what is meant by various terms and why we are justified, if we are, in holding the beliefs that we have. Now, this means that one crucial service philosophy can perform for coaches is to compel us to be clear about what we are talking about. For example, what actually are mental health and mental illness? And are they really like physical health and physical illness? For what it's worth, I think the talk of mental health on the analogy of physical health is actually both mistaken and misleading, especially if it promotes models of cures for mental illnesses. Crucially, also, philosophical awareness forces us to think hard about what we mean by the term recovery. Crudely, people measure recovery, in relation to addiction at least, in terms of the percentages of people who are abstinent 2 years after treatment. In fact, whatever methods are used, about 20% of people treated meet this definition. Another 20% show virtually no alteration in behavior or well-being. But in between, most people's lives get somewhat better. Most people's lives get somewhat better with more or less frequent relapses, or more or less moderated and self and other destructive consumption or use. So to know whether you're being successful as a recovery coach isn't properly thought of as knowing whether you've succeeded in curing someone or failed to cure them. Most of it is about doing them some good in between those two extremes. Moreover, treatment often causes or enables people to improve their lives in ways which have little to do with their addictive behaviors. And we also need to be much clearer about what we mean by addiction anyway. For example, I have been for a long time prescribed sleeping pills, and I mean, according to one definition, therefore addicted to them. But actually, I don't regard myself as addicted to them. I simply regard myself as a habitual user. They are habit forming, not addictive. I don't get a high from them, and I don't need the ever increasing dosages to get me to sleep. And apparently insomnia is a problem for many people, most of whom solve the problem by consuming fairly substantial proportions of alcohol. So that sort of addiction, or what people call addiction, and particularly when doctors refuse to prescribe medication because it is, quote, addictive, seems to me to be one example of confusion about language which needs to be cleared up. Sorry, I've lost my place. Yes, no, I haven't. Here's the philosophy of mind proper. Philosophy of mind proper studies the relationship between the brain and other material objects like atoms as these relate to consciousness or the activities of minds. So one crucial question is, how does the mind, or how do the mind and the body interact with one another? These are questions which philosophical psychology, or the philosophy of mind, tries to answer, and spectacularly fails to do so. Fortunately, for the practical problem of living well and trying to help others to live well, which coaches and others are concerned with, this fact that people can't solve the mind-body problem, so-called, doesn't need to bother us. What matters to us is the way people subjectively feel and experience, not what is the current and developing objective state of the atoms which make up their brains. So neuroscience, at least so far, doesn't actually have very much to tell us of the sort that we need to know, which is mostly about human emotions. What does matter to people involved in trying to heal people, to healers, is the question of the relationship between subjective states of consciousness and objective brain states, because for one reason and one reason only. This is that we know that when states of people's feelings alter, so do their brain states, and vice versa. When their brain states alter, so do their feelings. We also know that people experiencing psychological problems or emotional difficulties are sometimes helped by medication, and sometimes also by talking, as in a coaching session. In fact, for better or for worse, more and more people everywhere are being prescribed more and more pills to overcome depressive and anxiety disorders, to say nothing of obsessions and delusions, though rather surprisingly, they're not prescribed pills much for addictions. In fact, I don't think naltrexone has been prescribed to more than 1% of all American diagnosed addicts. So given this major increase in the prescription of pills, the question for us arises of a rather material nature: is Big Pharma about to put us coaches and other talk therapists out of business? Well, the answer is no. This fear amongst the caring professions and hope amongst the purveyors of pills is based on two philosophical mistakes. First, without asking people about their subjective states, i.e. their thoughts, perceptions, memories, and feelings, we could never know how changes in these might correlate with medically induced changes in brain states. So learning how to fix a psyche or a mental condition could, as a matter of logic, never be like learning how to fix a car or other piece of machinery. Thus, you don't need to ask a car how it is feeling after putting oil in it or changing its sparking plugs. But this is precisely what you need to do after prescribing SSRIs. The second mistake is that brain states are not only immensely complex in their interaction, in the interaction of different parts of them, but they are also highly fluid and evolve and change in response to all sorts of stimuli, including listening to the talk of others and engaging in the kind of silent talking to oneself, which we call thinking. So right now, I am actually altering the states of your brains. And I'm also altering my own brain state as I try to monitor what I'm saying and make micro adaptations to how I'm saying it. So what is the role of external or physiological interventions, drugs and the like? The question for coaches and other therapists is not a choice between physiology and psychology. It is how best to alter brain behaviors so as to facilitate healthier and happier states of mind. As yet, we know a little, but not much, about this from our scientific studies of brains, though we may hope in due course to learn more. But we do know a great deal about this from the accumulated experience and reflections of human beings over a very long period of time in a large variety of cultures, ancient and modern, Western and Eastern, well documented and preserved only in oral tradition, mystical and commonsensical. We should therefore be willing to learn from all these sources, but be naively gullible and critical about all of them, or any of them. Besides, coaches can fruitfully collaborate with other people involved in trying to make states of consciousness healthier and happier. Some conditions respond better or faster to physiological interventions, the administration of drugs or brain manipulations like ECT and surgery. They respond faster and better to those than they do to psychological interventions like talk therapies. This is true, for example, of delusions, of some forms of depression, and as I've mentioned, I think for insomnia. But almost all such interventions also require coaching type support. That is, people have to actually learn not just how to get over their depression, but how actually to navigate the difficult business of living. So coaching focuses on future goods rather than past evils. People do need to become rational and reconciled about how the past is affecting their present circumstances and future prospects. So they need to understand what happened to them in the past and what its effects have been, and how they can put the bad stuff behind them or learn from it and so transform it into good stuff. Psychoanalysis-derived treatments can help here. But, there's a big but, here's something we know about what doesn't work. One of the few things we know about psychotherapy is this. If you encourage your patient to spend much time thinking about all the bad things that happen to them and all the bad people who cause them to suffer, they will almost certainly get worse. This is because you are encouraging them, your clients, resentment, self-pity, the blaming of all their troubles on others, and discouraging gratitude, hope, and taking responsibility for the future. And note here, my favorite metaphor for this, we are not responsible for the cards we are dealt, only with how well or badly we play them. And the best players are those who know how to win with bad cards as well as with good ones. So there's a need for eclecticism in coaches, picking and choosing amongst different forms of treatment, different branches of knowledge about psychology, and different methods of treatment. Though there is much wisdom in respect of how to make our own lives and those of others go better, there is also much snake oil, and there are no magic bullets. We should also remember that even the best science is always incomplete and always provisional, and that many proposed remedies for the ills of the human condition do more, often much more, harm than good. In any case, the business of trying to help other people alter their states of mind, emotions, attitudes, dispositions, desires, so that they are better able to enjoy their lives, is not a matter of applying general theories in particular situations, nor of deducing the implications of supposedly universal dogma for prescribing behaviors to particular individuals. It is a matter, as I have been stressing previously, of following a vocation. I want to say a little bit more about coaching as a vocation. If coaching is a vocation for you, then from somewhere inside yourself, you feel a strong desire to make the world in some way a better place than it currently is. You want, in other words, to do good. And there's nothing sissy or soppy about that. You therefore need, by a process of rigorous self-examination, possibly assisted by a trusted advisor, to figure out what are the particular talents, enthusiasms, and resources which you can uniquely bring to the task of trying to make life better for particular people in particular situations in particular ways. You then need to work out how you can do this while keeping your own life going reasonably well, both your material circumstances and your own psychological development. You then need to find a context in which you can prosecute your vocation, i.e. in a job or in a private practice. But like other vocations, coaching is an endless quest of examination and self-examination, so as to do the following. First of all, update your particular objectives at particular stages of your career. Then consider the appropriateness of your allocation of time, talent, and energy to the diversity of things you feel called upon to try to do at this particular time of your life. Balancing professional and family life, balancing study and practice, balancing disagreeable chores with with congenial recreation, etc. Then there's an endless quest to assess and reassess your own state of mind in relation to your work. Are you frustrated, bored, complacent, disenchanted? Or are you getting a good sense of achievement and plenty of enjoyment? Then you need to identify what you don't know and what you need to study further. And finally, you need to consider how the demands of your vocation should develop and change over the course of your lifetime. So that's why I call it an endless quest of self-examination and indeed of study. Well, are you coaches getting it right? What's the evidence? Well, there's evidence about what doesn't work, as we've already noticed. And I've now lost my place. I've lost my... Can we have a pause while I find myself?
I can on this one. I don't think on the last one. Nope, I'm afraid not. We can't pause.
Right. Well, can I get into my PowerPoint?
Yes.
How can I do that?
So open your computer. Just minimize Zoom.
But how do I minimize Zoom?
You press that little
full screen like that.
Yeah.
Right. Now I can get into the PowerPoint, and now I can go down to where I was. Can you guys still see me?
Yeah.
Right. So that was the evidence of what doesn't work. Here's the evidence about what does work. Seeking help makes it 5 times more likely that people will get well than if they don't seek help. So that's good news. On the other hand, it doesn't matter much what type of help people seek or from whom. It doesn't matter whether they see super qualified psychiatrists of whatever persuasion, Freudian, Jungian, Rogerian, transactional analysts, counselors of all sorts, clinical psychologists, ministers of religion, 12-step sponsors, friends, and favorite aunts. The only necessary but not sufficient condition for getting well is that the client or the patient or the coachee believes that the person they are seeking help from really cares about them. Unfortunately, as I say, that's a sufficient condition, but it's not enough. Luck, or if you are religious, grace comes into it as well. You therefore need, and your clients need, to work hard at improving your luck, and your clients need to work hard at opening themselves up to sources of grace. Now, I just thought I would conclude with a couple of slides. 5 useful and under-noticed lessons which coaches can benefit from Freud. First of all, Freud said, as I've quoted before, the best therapy is a change in the reality situation. This is one reason, in my view, why rehabs fail so consistently. They don't change the reality situation, or indeed tell people how to change the reality situation, which drove them to escape from it into drink or drugs or gambling or whatever in the first place. Secondly, Freud tells us that the mind must be partly unconscious. It can't all be simply physiological in its workings. Otherwise, hypnosis wouldn't work, nor would there be a placebo effect on drugs. And in fact, rather interestingly, Freud only invented psychoanalysis because unlike his mentor, Charcot, he couldn't himself do hypnosis. Then thirdly, but though much of our lives are shaped by thoughts and feelings of which we are unconscious, there is no such thing, said Freud with considerable anger, as the subconscious. That suggests a sort of physical model of things being on top and underneath. Whereas what Freud was interested in was the things we're aware of and the things we're not aware of, and making us aware of the things we're currently unaware of in a helpful and health-giving way. Freud was also amongst those who thought that this must be all there is, which is, you may recall, how I described the fundamental position of people who have no religion. They just think this is all there is. Consequently, he couldn't understand religion, understood as the hunger for eternity, as one of his critics put it. But he did think, interestingly enough, that we could achieve a quasi-religious sense of being at one with the universe through drugs, through sex, and through creative work. He also came to believe in a version of original sin, a fundamental drive towards death and destruction, which was the opposite of the drive towards pleasure, which he called libido, and which he couldn't, but whose opposite he couldn't decide whether to call that mortido or distrudo. But either way, he thought that actually we all possess within us fundamentally destructive drives, self-destructive and other destructive. And that's a reality we have to face as therapists of any sort. He also said that all he had really achieved was to codify the psychological insights of the great writers and poets and artists like Sophocles, who wrote about Oedipus and his complex, Shakespeare, Leonardo da Vinci, and Dostoevsky, who wrote about gambling. I want to conclude by quoting two pieces of poetry, which I must confess I typed up from memory, so I haven't checked them. But they give me at least a very powerful insight into what we are trying, what our condition is like, whatever it is we're trying to do creatively, but including trying to help other people enjoy their lives more. Here's what T.S. Eliot said. And what there is to conquer by strength and by submission is only what has already been discovered once or twice or several times by men whom one cannot hope to emulate, but there is no competition. There is only the fight to recover what has been lost and found and lost again and again in the general mess of imprecision of feeling. And now under circumstances that seem unpropitious, but perhaps neither gain nor loss. For us, there is only the trying. The rest is not our business. And finally, a quotation from Auden's poem In Memoriam Sigmund Freud, which he wrote after Sigmund Freud died in 1939. He says of Freud, he wasn't clever at all. He merely told the unhappy present to recite the past like a poetry lesson, till sooner or later it faltered at the line where long ago the accusations had begun, and knew by whom it had been judged, how rich life had been and how silly, and was life forgiven and more humble, able to approach the future as a friend, without a set mask of rectitude or a wardrobe of excuses. Thank you. End of lecture 4.
Great stuff.
Can anyone hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can
Okay.
see you.
All right. Would you like us to end the lecture there, end the recording, or should we have a discussion?
I'm in your hands.
Well, I'm in your hands. I mean,
What's the time?
I'm curious about the structure of the series, how you've structured the lectures.
Well, I'm not sure they have a structure exactly. It's called making it up as you go along, to use one of your favorite phrases. But I think the general idea is that there are all sorts of things which I've studied in the course of my life under the heading philosophy, which seem to me to be extremely useful in living one's own life, or trying to live one's own life as well as one can, and trying to help other people. And as far as there's a structure, the structure is based on the main divisions of philosophy itself. First is metaphysics, which is, I didn't use the term because it's rather an intimidating term to start off with, but that's what's the world really like. The second, which was on moral philosophy, is really, and what should we do about it? How should we live? The third was about religion, because religion is the way in which most people in the past have related the first question, what's the nature of reality, to the question, how should we live? But many people now describe themselves as having no religion. And that creates quite a challenge, because they still need some of the things that religions supplied, like a sense that their life is meaningful and purposeful. And I also suggested they need, would benefit from treating their work as if it were a vocation, even if they don't think there's anyone there to do the calling. And also in relation to religion, I stressed that although many people reject, not merely as mistaken, but as repulsive, the whole notion of original sin, we nevertheless have to live with our irremediable capacity for failure in all sorts of ways. We fail in ourselves, we fail other people, we fail in our ambitions, and we fail to pursue our vocations as fully and faithfully as we would like. And so one needs what religion used to provide, which is an analog for both sin and forgiveness, for failure and how to live with it. And then this week, I move more directly into the philosophy of mind, that is, what we're trying to alter is people's consciousness. But there are all sorts of questions about, as I've just been saying, about what consciousness is, and mistakes we can make of a philosophical sort, which it seems to me have done quite a lot of damage in the world of psychotherapy generally, or the caring professions. And
can you give an example?
well, yes, I mean, I think the whole notion that recovery is an all or nothing affair is a classic example of something which is deeply damaging. Because actually, I'm not quite sure whether this is exactly what you teach, but one of the things I always like to ask people is, not how much do you drink or how much do you gamble, but what else do you do? And what are you good at? And what do you like? And things like that, because we are really in the business not of curing a measles-like disease. We're really in the business of helping people to live somewhat better lives than they would have done otherwise. And in that sense, it seems to me, you either say everybody is addicted to something. I mean, everybody is afflicted or addicted. Or you say, well, no one's addicted. It's just the human condition. And that really changes your perspective if you don't think of yourself as a kind of mini doctor, but as someone who is more like a shaman, maybe someone who's just basically trying to make people's lives better. I think that's likely to make people more effective. Next week, I'm going to talk about political philosophy, because coaching very definitely takes place within political structures in a highly politicized society. And that raises some quite awkward questions. But we'll get to those next week when I've worked out what the questions are and what I think the answers might be. And then finally, I'll try and sum it all up.
All right.